Heaven does not create one person to stand above another, nor one person to stand below another. It is only due to differences in education that some find themselves elevated, while others are subjugated. This isn't merely a rallying cry. It's the heartfelt declaration of a man who once witnessed his entire nation bowing subserviently before the world. The words are simple, yet sharp as a blade, severing all misconceptions about divine will and predetermined fate. They return to each individual a responsibility both heavy and glorious. We ourselves determine our place, no one else. An encouragement of learning is not a book to be casually read and forgotten. It is a manifesto of enlightenment, a bell that awakened a society slumbering in dogma over a century ago. These words once shook Japan to its core. And today, as we turn its pages, we still find it vividly alive, as if speaking directly to our lives, to the most vulnerable parts we try to conceal. There's a paradox that troubles me deeply. Never before have humans had so many means of learning: books, newspapers, the internet, classes everywhere. Yet, never have we felt so bewildered and adrift. Knowledge overflows, but the spirit of independence is lacking. We are easily swayed by the crowd, quick to bow before money, and prone to neglecting the fundamental question: why do we learn? Fukuzawa Yukichi posed that very question over a century ago, and he answered it not with abstract philosophy, but with everyday observation. The educated walk with their heads held high, the uneducated suffer disadvantages. Education isn't solely for wealth, it's for preserving dignity. We learn not to memorize ancient texts, but to solve today's problems. We learn to understand our rights, but also our responsibilities. We learn to no longer remain silent in the face of injustice. Reading this book, I ask myself, placed in today's context, are we any different from the Japanese people of that era? We, too, live in a volatile world, surrounded by more powerful civilizations. We also tend either to blindly worship the new or to cling defensively to the old. And we, too, face the question of how to achieve true independence, not just political, but spiritual independence. You might ask, amidst the countless books overflowing today, why dedicate time to an encouragement of learning? Because it's not just history, it's a mirror reflecting our present. It doesn't teach us quick-rich schemes, but it reveals a profound truth. If an individual learns and acts, that individual will be free. If an entire nation learns and acts, that nation will be self-reliant. I invite you to embark on this journey with me, not as a passive reader, but as a fellow traveler. Let every word confront you. How are we living? Are we truly free or merely wearing the guise of freedom? Do we learn to become human or just to adorn a name? The question I want to leave you with before we delve deeper is, if tomorrow all material possessions around you disappeared, your home, money, fame, what would you have left to stand upon? Would it be an independent spirit, or would you collapse, having never cultivated it? All of us, when we open our eyes to greet the world, are naked and equal. No one is born with a divine right to a throne, nor is anyone destined to bow their head forever. Yet, looking around, I still see bottomless chasms between the rich and the poor, between the powerful and the oppressed, between the wise and the ignorant. Why does this gap exist? If all humans share the same starting point, the answer isn't divine will. It lies in whether one is diligent in learning. Some embark early on the path of learning, persevering in contemplation, thereby expanding their minds, securing their status, and enjoying prosperous households. Others who turn their backs on knowledge remain trapped in the shadows of poverty, becoming marginalized figures in society. Heaven bestows wealth upon no one. Wealth is the fruit of sweat, education, and what one dares to conquer for oneself. But the education I speak of is not the kind found in books used for ostentation, for haughty quotations of ancient texts that bear no relation to life. Such learning only burdens the mind and empties the pockets. To learn only to recite classical phrases at wine parties, while impoverished parents and farmers shoulder the burden of tuition fees. That is a path of learning that leads directly to ruin. I have witnessed countless individuals who acquired much erudition yet remained poor and failed, because the knowledge they possessed had no bearing on real life. True education must be intrinsically linked to daily life. Everyone needs to master the alphabet, know how to write letters, keep records, and honestly calculate every penny. We need to study geography to understand the land we inhabit and the countries of the world. physics to discern the nature of things, history to know humanity's path. Economics is essential for both family and nation, and ethics to keep our behavior from straying. Only when knowledge permeates every meal, every interaction, every transaction, does it become the foundation for a decent life. Such learning is beneficial. It's what anyone, regardless of background, must equip themselves with. An educated individual is self-reliant, a family with such a person is self-reliant, and a nation with enough such citizens is truly independent. However, when I speak of freedom and independence, some hastily misunderstand it as the right to live solely for oneself. They cling to the word freedom to satisfy personal desires, justifying it by saying, "It's my money, I'll spend it as I please." They indulge in alcohol and lavishly squander youth on frivolous pursuits, believing it harms no one. But it is precisely these revelries that gather friends, sow vice, corrupt education, and deplete morality. Such freedom is destruction, not liberation. True freedom means understanding one's place in the community, knowing how to act without harming others, and defending one's own freedom while preserving the freedom of fellow human beings. That is freedom intertwined with responsibility, freedom accompanied by discipline. I recall my own country, a small island nation long closed off, self-sufficient, believing it needed no one. When the Western fleet appeared, that isolation immediately revealed its naivete. While the world was already interconnected by trade and knowledge, many of us still argued about whether to open or close our doors, still called foreigners barbarians. They were like frogs in a well, seeing only a small patch of sky and imagining it to be the entire universe. But what is the truth? We and they breathe the same air, enjoy the same sunlight, live on the same earth. If we have surplus, we share. If we lack, we receive. We learn from each other. That is the true principle. Closing our doors and deluding ourselves into believing we are the center of the universe only leads to hatred and contempt from outsiders. That is self-isolation, national selfishness. Only when each citizen understands the true meaning of freedom can a nation preserve its independence. I believe that if our homeland is ever shamed, each of us Japanese will rise to defend its honor, without needing anyone to urge us. For losing a nation is not merely losing territory, it is losing the very soul of a people. Therefore, education is not a luxury, nor a private pastime. It is a matter of survival. It teaches us right from wrong, helps us speak out with dignity against injustice, and empowers us to fulfill our duty to the nation. We learn to protest legitimately. We learn so we don't have to whisper complaints behind the backs of authorities. We learn to stand tall and engage in debate, to struggle. A nation truly matures only when each individual within it dares to learn, to understand, and to act. Equality is not something granted. It is the result of accumulated common knowledge, shared and defended with flesh and blood if necessary. Freedom cannot merely be an excuse for self-gratification. That right to freedom must be coupled with responsibility. If everyone only thinks of their own interests, the nation becomes like a body torn apart, each part pulling in a different direction, ultimately unable to stand firm. Thus, education is a mirror for each person to clearly see their place in society. It doesn't transform us into narrow-minded individualists. Rather, it trains us to coexist with others. I have seen many people who believe themselves free, but in reality, they merely chase after their desires. They consider pleasure a right, yet abandon its consequences to society. It is precisely this delusion that forms the chains that bind, not liberation. I once reflected on the days when Japan was closed off, its ports sealed. The populace was accustomed to thinking of foreigners as barbarians, and they repeated this as an immutable truth. But when the Western fleet appeared, that arrogance immediately crumbled. How could one call those who possess steel ships, cannons, and colossal mechanical factories barbarians? While we were still fumbling with bows and arrows and rudimentary farming, our very ignorance turned our nation into a laughingstock, making our country a prey to external ambitions. If we stubbornly insist on self-isolation, sooner or later we will self-destruct. Education is the only way to escape the narrow bottom of the well, to learn to see the world, to know where one stands and where one needs to go. Learning is also the only path that helps us know how to speak out. In the past, under feudalism, the common people only knew fear. When officials and soldiers passed by, the people had to step aside. The horses of generals also made us bow our heads. Even a hunting bird made us prostrate until it flew out of sight. That was not law, it was merely the fabrication of a tyrannical regime, sowing fear to maintain power. Now, with those absurd rules abolished, there is no longer any reason for us to be afraid. If the government errs, we must dare to protest. If decisions are unjust, we must dare to debate. A legitimate protest, in harmony with heavenly principles and the will of the people, even if it costs one's life, is still worth voicing. That is a duty no one should evade. People often speak of independence and freedom as the highest values. But I want to emphasize that such independence and freedom are only sustainable when protected by education. Without education, people are easily deceived, quick to bow down, and readily accept oppression. The uneducated are no different from silent mutes in a crowd, unable to protect themselves or their nation. I have witnessed many who, for lack of knowledge, became a laughingstock to others. They speak awkwardly, are led by the nose without knowing it, endure humiliation without daring to resist, and live mundane lives. And when the nation is threatened, they are merely a burden. That is the tragedy of those who turn their backs on education. This is why I say the most disadvantaged person is the uneducated one. Poverty can be overcome if we have knowledge. Weakness can be transformed into strength if we know the way forward. But when ignorance takes hold, all doors slam shut. We lose not only our personal freedom, but also weaken the freedom of the entire nation. The more I reflect, the more I believe that education is the source of dignity. It transforms an ordinary person into someone who can hold their head high. It teaches us shame when we bow to blind power and courage to speak out when justice is trampled. Learning is not just for wealth, but first and foremost, for preserving self-respect. The most terrifying thing is not poverty, but the resignation to ignorance. The poor can still learn, can still rise. But the ignorant who are content with darkness will remain mere shadows of others throughout their lives. Some often console each other, saying that fate is predetermined and cannot be resisted. But if we reflect carefully, we will see that it is humanity itself that determines its destiny. Divine will is not an unchangeable binding rope. Effort and willpower can break it. Human history has proven that nations seemingly driven to the brink can still rise again thanks to the human spirit. I call that the power of an independent spirit. It doesn't come naturally, nor is it a gift from creation. That spirit is forged in every failure, every humiliation, every suppressed aspiration. Without cultivation, it will wither, but if nourished daily, it will become an undying flame. When I look at the pages of history, I see a clear difference. In Japan, there were once feudal lords who regarded the populace merely as tools for service. To them, the people were just assets, sources of taxes, a passive workforce. In contrast, in the West, there were leaders who viewed the populace as the very root of the nation, awakening their strength, transforming them into allies. The gap between these two perspectives is precisely the gap between a stagnant nation and a progressive one. Personal humiliation never stops at the individual when a person accepts being disrespected. It drags down the entire community to which that person belongs into contempt. I once felt ashamed seeing my compatriots kowtow before foreigners. Simply for not knowing foreign languages or customs, that mortification belonged not just to them, but to the entire nation. If individuals do not feel shame, the nation will be humiliated forever. But if each person knows how to transform that shame into a motivation to learn, to progress, then the nation will rise. That is the connection between individual dignity and national independence. Therefore, cultivating one's spirit is not a temporary endeavor, it must be a continuous daily task. No muscle grows strong without exercise. The spirit is the same. If we are not accustomed to facing hardship, we will collapse the moment a storm hits. But if we have been tempered, each challenge becomes an opportunity to grow stronger. I know many people still await protection, still believe that if there are brilliant leaders, the people will prosper. That is a dangerous delusion. A nation cannot rely on a few individuals if its populace remains ignorant. Even with a few outstanding figures, the country cannot advance far. A strong community must be built on the foundation of individuals who know how to maintain independence and bear responsibility. Some might ask, what can ordinary people do? I answer that they are the very foundation. Without a sense of independence in each person, the nation is merely a castle built on sand. Only when millions of individuals possess self-determination, when no one is easily manipulated, will the nation truly be stable. From this, I realized a simple principle. Human courage does not spring from ease and comfort. It is born from collisions, from moments when we are pushed to the wall. To be happy yet still prepare for humiliation, that is true character. Anyone can be happy when things go well. Only those who maintain an independent spirit in times of hardship are truly capable of bearing great responsibilities. History never grants opportunities to cowards. Opportunities always emerge where people know how to cultivate their spirit. The middle class, ordinary intellectuals, are precisely the force to bear the responsibility of pioneering civilization. We cannot forever rely on the ruling class or revered heroes. It is precisely those who seem ordinary who shape the destiny of the nation. People often think courage comes from hot blood, from a daring instinct, but true courage stems from education and wisdom. Only when we clearly understand ourselves and our circumstances can we step forward without fear. Courage is not blindly rushing into danger. Courage is knowing the danger yet still advancing for an ideal. If you ask me where courage is born, I will answer. It is born from learning, from reflection, from the lessons we draw from life's journey. It is nurtured by the desire for independence, by the will to not be enslaved. And once that courage takes root in every individual, the nation will become a steadfast rock, unshaken by any foreign power. Ever since I began contemplating the responsibilities of those in power, my heart has been ceaselessly troubled. Those with high social standing are traditionally seen as being above others, but that doesn't mean they have the right to do as they please. If relying solely on raw power, civilization cannot advance, it will only breed weakness among the populace. What pains me is that, at that time, Japan had many Japanese people, but not yet a true Japanese citizenry. People lived fragmented lives, separated by class and status. Those above gave no thought to their responsibilities towards those below. Those below were only accustomed to obedience and fear. How could such a nation truly maintain independence? I realized that if a person in power lacks education, they will easily become a despot. They judge everything without ever putting in the effort, determining right and wrong without relying on real-world experience. Sadly, such people are not uncommon in society. They wield words as authority, using superficiality as a wall to conceal their emptiness. Such useless things not only bring no benefit but undoubtedly harm the nation. This harmful habit extended from the imperial court to the villages. People liked to discuss but feared action. They were quick to judge before ever attempting to act, sitting idly, pointing fingers. A country with such habits is like a gravely ill person who refuses medicine. I recall debates with my contemporaries. Someone said, "We are so small, how can we dare to confront the vast world?" I replied, "If everyone thinks that way, we will spend our entire lives bowing our heads. For a nation to be independent, each person must dare to try, dare to act. Sitting forever in a dark room, we will never know how brilliant the light outside truly is." The responsibility of those in high positions is not merely to rule, they must become role models. When a leader maintains education and exercises reason, the people will follow. But when they are greedy, ignorant, and selfish, that is a poison spreading throughout the nation. One person in the wrong place can ruin the entire mechanism, and those mistakes often make the people suffer. Sometimes I ask myself, why does our nation repeatedly exhibit familiar weaknesses? The answer perhaps lies in the slowness of spiritual change. The body may be healthy, but the spirit is tightly bound by old habits. This is why many Japanese possess Japanese bodies but lack the soul of an independent citizenry. This leads me to believe that what needs changing is not just external laws, but also the internal spirit. We must know how to reject an irresponsible way of life, dare to cut away bad habits that have been deeply ingrained for centuries. Otherwise, all reforms will merely be patching cracks in a crumbling wall. I have often told my students, until you have tried, do not rush to debate right and wrong. True education is not for showing off, but for action. One must roll up their sleeves and get to work, allowing sweat and intellect to blend to truly understand its value. Sitting in a room merely speaking only enriches illusions. Therefore, what I yearn for in the new generation is the ability to transform knowledge into practice. Don't be afraid of making mistakes, only be afraid of not daring to act. One misstep is more valuable than 1,000 baseless predictions. If each Japanese person dares to step out of the shadow of fear, the nation will gradually develop a truly independent spirit. At this point, I see even more clearly the necessity of courage. Not a blind bravery, but a courage forged by wisdom. This courage is not born in royal palaces, nor does it belong solely to the upper class. It must be cultivated in every individual, from the most ordinary person. When people understand that happiness can vanish at any moment, only then do they prepare themselves mentally to face humiliation. Only when aware of life's fragility do we maintain a resilient character. Satisfaction is fleeting. Humiliation, however, is the whip that drives us forward. If the Japanese people want to find a new path, they must start there. From alertness, from courage, from acknowledging that independence is the responsibility of all, not just a select few deemed to be above others. There is a truth that is hard to deny. If a nation relies solely on military might or political power without nurturing a foundation of education and morality, that civilization will soon perish. I have seen many people in society complacent with their titles and authority, but when confronted with the question of how their nation's civilization advances, they fall silent, for they only know power and forget that power cannot replace knowledge. During my observations of the people, I often hear complaints. Our country is weak due to a lack of good leaders. But I think differently. The problem is not merely with a few individuals in power, but with the nation's failure to cultivate a national spirit. There are Japanese people, but not yet a Japanese citizenry. Each person lives only for themselves, their family clan, their social class, lacking a common consciousness of community and nation. That is the greatest illness. I have witnessed countless scenes of people in power boasting of their status, disregarding even reason. They like to judge right and wrong from afar, but dare not step into reality to test themselves. Some have never laid a hand on a task yet stand to lecture and criticize. The more such people there are, the more stagnant the nation becomes. I once said, what is not beneficial will certainly be harmful. Society must shed that habit if it wishes to find a path to progress. Sometimes I think the greatest humiliation for the Japanese is not poverty, but a lack of self-confidence, the habit of bowing down. That weakness stems from the habit of waiting for others, fearing mistakes, fearing trying. I remember once seeing a group of people debating for hours on what should be done. In the end, no one dared to stand up and implement it. The discussion was lively, but action was zero. I ask myself, can a nation that only knows how to discuss, but dares not put itself to the test truly be independent? Meanwhile, I believe that true courage only comes when one dares to begin. One cannot know if a path is long or short, difficult or easy, without ever taking a step. Experience itself is the measure of right and wrong, not mere pronouncements. This is true not only for individuals, but also for an entire nation. From that, I reached a conclusion. Human courage must be tempered, and education is the fire that melts away cowardice. When knowledge illuminates, people become alert enough to recognize danger, and from there, know how to confront it. Courage without wisdom is mere recklessness, but courage cultivated by understanding becomes enduring strength. I see the immense role of the educated middle class. They are not aristocrats, nor are they entirely poor. It is they, with their knowledge and ability to connect, who are the force capable of undertaking the mission of pioneering civilization if they choose to rise. To spread knowledge, to dedicate themselves to building the nation, then the nation will have a solid pillar. But if they turn their backs, caring only for themselves, the country will lose its only chance to recover. From the topic of courage, I move to contemplate law. Without strict laws, all ideals are but dreams. I believe that each citizen must bear a double responsibility, caring for themselves while also bearing responsibility towards the community. If one only cares for oneself, society will disintegrate. If one only cares for the community while neglecting oneself, one cannot go far either. Laws need to be clear and simple, yet strict. They cannot be arbitrarily changed at the whim of those in power. Regrettably, in my country, the administrative machinery is dominated by wooden-headed officials, meaning rigid mechanical, lacking flexibility and understanding. They don't truly comprehend the law, yet they impose it like shackles, causing the populace to harbor more grievances. I have heard many people glorify loyal and righteous officials, viewing them as moral exemplars, but when viewed from a legal perspective, I see danger. For if an individual, out of blind loyalty, dares to transgress the law, that is no longer righteousness. Society needs individuals who know how to place law above sentiment, above personal relationships. Only then can justice be maintained and the nation have a firm foundation. I reiterate that law is not for adornment. It is the pillar of the nation, the clear boundary between right and wrong. If laws are bent, the populace will lose faith. A nation that loses faith in its laws is like a ship adrift. When considering the responsibility of each person in society, I cannot help but speak of the role of the citizenry. A nation that wishes to endure cannot rely solely on its rulers or a small elite. Strength must come from the entire populace, from each individual who knows they are a part of the common destiny. A true citizen is not just someone who knows how to enjoy rights, but also someone who knows how to bear duties. Paying taxes is not coercion, but proof of the bond between us and the nation. Serving in the military, defending borders, is not a useless sacrifice, but an assurance of one's family's freedom and peace. Only when each citizen accepts their share of responsibility will the nation truly have a firm foundation. Conversely, if everyone only wants to enjoy themselves while shirking duties, that nation will soon perish. I have witnessed countless people choosing the easy path, despising the act of bearing responsibility. They are engrossed in living for today, but forget that this very attitude sows disaster for future generations. In a society where people lack integrity, the future of their descendants will only be an extended legacy of cowardice. I believe that the loss of individual integrity is no less dangerous than the loss of territory. For once people are accustomed to bowing their heads, they will surrender their freedom without shame. Those in power will also grow accustomed to ruling through oppression, treating the populace like a docile herd. If that cycle continues, the nation will gradually become a soulless corpse. But for national responsibility to become a reality, we must first change how we perceive each other. Since ancient times, society has been accustomed to biased views, judging others based on personal prejudice. That not only distorts individual character, but also stifles common progress. Some look down upon those dressed simply, considering them inferior. Others sneer at those who cannot recite many classical Chinese characters. These prejudices become invisible chains, preventing people from seeing true worth. I have seen many talented individuals suppressed simply because they didn't conform to outdated notions. Conversely, arrogant individuals were praised merely for pretending to be wise. This distortion stems from misguided learning. The books of Zhu Zai and the ancient Confucians were once revered as absolute standards, but when reflected against real life, we see that many things in them are merely empty dogmas. They became rigid molds, forcing people to live in a single way, burying countless potentials. Such learning is no different from building a prison for oneself. I protest not to deny the entire value of tradition, but to assert that education must go hand in hand with reality. Knowledge that does not help us understand people and society is merely a burden. Freedom is inherent in every person, yet it is shackled by such prejudices. To be liberated, we must dare to break these chains. This leads me to a big question. What, ultimately, is the purpose of education? Many learn to seek fame, to boast. They treat knowledge as an ornament merely to adorn themselves. But learning like that is useless, even if one studies their whole life. Knowledge not connected to social duty is merely a pastime. True education must help us know how to live rightly, act justly, and contribute to the progress of the community. A person who learns well but does not know how to share or serve is like a brilliantly shining lamp hidden in a room. If that light doesn't spread, it will eventually fade. Each generation benefits from the achievements left by previous generations, from works and knowledge to laws. All are legacies that our ancestors painstakingly built. Therefore, education also carries the meaning of gratitude. We learn not just for ourselves, but to continue to enrich the common treasury of humanity. A nation that knows how to learn and transmit knowledge will never perish. I believe that education is the only path to lead a nation from slavery to freedom. It teaches people to respect the law, to bear national responsibility, to dismantle prejudices, and finally, to live for a common future. That is not theory, but a truth proven through every step of history. As I ponder deeper on education, a clear image emerges. It is like a guiding lamp. If you only hold it in your hand to show off, its light will never shine outward. But if you use it to illuminate the path for yourself and others, the way will open and society will advance. The most lamentable thing is not material poverty, but that people lose the true purpose of learning. How many spend their days reciting ancient texts, imagining they are swimming in a sea of knowledge, when in truth they are merely lulling themselves to sleep? They view quoting and expounding as a way to prove their wisdom, yet they cannot apply that knowledge to solve even a trivial problem in daily life. A nation that is only captivated by such a type of learning is like a boat that merely circles the harbor, never daring to venture out to sea. Learning is not to bind, but to liberate. Learn to become freer, to dare to think independently, to not bow down to oppression. Learn to know who you are, where you stand, and what you must do. I have repeatedly emphasized that education must go hand in hand with social responsibility. The more knowledge one possesses, the more one must know how to bear. Wisdom is not something to be accumulated privately, but a common asset. If not contributed, that knowledge will turn into a burden. Only when it flows into the lifeblood of the community does it become valuable. I remember the preceding generations. They toiled, they built, they shed sweat and blood to leave us the foundation we have today. If this generation learns without considering the future, it is no different from betraying the efforts of our ancestors. Learning is not merely to enjoy the present, but to repay the past and to bestow upon the future. This is why I oppose those who view education as a luxury item, like a coat to show off. They forget that learning is to build the spiritual foundation of the nation. Without that spirit, a nation, no matter how materially prosperous, will fall into dependence. People often ask me, "Why do you keep repeating yourself about education?" I answer, because education is the root of everything. If you want freedom, you must have education. If you want independence, you must have education. If you want a true citizenry, you must especially have education. It not only helps individuals rise, but also shapes the destiny of the nation. If a nation relies only on military might and fleeting wealth, it will eventually decline. But a nation that values knowledge and knows how to pass it on to future generations, no matter how humble its beginning, will gradually progress towards civilization. Looking back, I clearly see how from asserting that heaven does not create one person above another, to demonstrating that the uneducated suffer the most, then emphasizing the role of an independent spirit, national responsibility, and law all converge on a single point: education. It is the thread connecting the individual to the family to society, and society to the nation. And I believe that once each Japanese citizen becomes aware of this, the country will no longer be a land of fragmented Japanese people, but will become a nation of true Japanese citizens. Only then can we truly hold our heads high before the world, without shame or hesitation, but confidently step into the ranks of civilized nations. Humans are not born to live forever in the shadow of yesterday. No matter how precious memories are, they are merely footprints etched into the ground, unable to replace the path ahead. If we cling tightly to the past, we will be bound by what has been, gradually losing our capacity to dream and create. I always believe that life only has meaning when it looks forward, even today's humiliation. If seen with foresight, it can become motivation for tomorrow. Scarcity, backwardness, if transformed into a lesson, are precisely the stepping stones to rise. But if we merely stop to complain, we will never get anywhere. Education is the same. What we receive today is not to be stored in bookshelves, but to build the foundation for the future. Unused knowledge is like seeds forgotten in a sealed jar. It will dry up and rot. Only when sown in the ground, bathed in sun and rain, will it germinate and flourish. Many around me only worry about the present. They want a full meal, a secure place, easy money. They shy away from thinking about tomorrow, for tomorrow is too distant, too vague. But precisely because of this, they are always caught off guard by events. When storms arrive, they panic, unprepared, and then blame fate. I once observed a wealthy merchant. He built a huge house, spent money lavishly, believing that was living life to the fullest. But when the market shifted, when foreign trade flooded in, his assets suddenly vanished. Throughout his life, he only thought of the present, unwilling to learn, unprepared for the future. He lost everything not because of enemies, but because of his own blindness. In contrast, I also saw a poor young man who diligently studied literacy, mathematics, and a trade day after day. He had nothing but willpower, but he knew that the future would come and only education could save him. Many years later, when opportunities opened up, he was ready. While many others were still fumbling, he quickly rose, becoming a pillar of his family and society. That is the difference. One person only lives in the present, while another knows how to build the future. One awaits destiny, while another creates it. I do not deny the value of the present. Every meal, every moment is precious, but if we only know how to live for today, we are no different from a boat that merely circles the harbor, never daring to set sail. The storms out there may be fierce, but it is precisely from those storms that the boat finds its grand journey. Someone asked me, isn't it better to live for the present? For the future is uncertain, after all. I answered, if everyone thought that way, we would not have this nation nor this civilization. Because our ancestors, despite hardships, still sowed seeds for future generations. They built temples, established schools, wrote books not for immediate gratification, but so their descendants would have a foundation. If they too had only lived for the present, we would have nothing today. Education is precisely a sacrifice for the future. Those who learn today may not immediately benefit, but their descendants will inherit. And that is the deepest meaning. We learn not only for ourselves, but also for the nations tomorrow. Therefore, I consider hope an indispensable quality. Hope is not a fleeting fantasy, but a firm belief that today's efforts will bear fruit tomorrow. Without hope, people will collapse in the face of adversity. With hope, even those with nothing can rise. Imagine a field ravaged by fire where you look around and see only ashes. But if the farmer gives up in despair, that land will remain barren forever. But if he patiently plows the land again, sows new seeds, then a few seasons later, rice will bloom once more. Hope is the only thing that keeps the farmer there, making him believe that the future can still flourish. A nation is similar. Perhaps today we are poor and despised. But if we know how to look forward, to learn, to prepare, then one day we will stand shoulder to shoulder with the world. But if we only live in the present, content with little, we will forever be mere shadows at the feet of others. When I speak of the future, many in society immediately thump their chests, proclaiming themselves patriots, bearers of the nation's heavy burdens. But upon close observation, I find most are merely dazzling facades. What they call patriotism is merely constructed from status or the shadow of class, not from genuine education or practical action. More sadly, some, simply by donning the cloak of lineage, imagine themselves pillars of the nation. They speak in grandiloquent terms, shouting resounding slogans, but when action is required, they evade it. They sit at home, sipping tea, discussing politics, but in reality, it's all an empty charade. A nation that relies on such people is like building a house on sand. I once met a group who proclaimed themselves patriots. They spoke of righteousness, loyalty, filial piety, and saving the nation. But when I asked, have you learned any trade? Do you know mathematics, geography, economics? Can you teach the people how to do business, how to manage? They faltered and hesitated. It turned out all they had were words. True spirit cannot be built on empty fame, but only forged through practical learning and action. Class and status, if used as a basis to claim the right to speak, only give rise to pseudo-patriots. They do not enrich the nation. Instead, they drain the people's strength. I call them charlatans because they bring no hope, only deepen illusions. The danger here is not just in deceit, but also in enchantment. The populace is naturally prone to believing those with reputation. When they see them dressed splendidly, speaking eloquently, the people easily mistake them for wise sages, for those bearing the nation's affairs. But in truth, they only know how to show off, while empty within. Consequently, the nation places its trust in the wrong place, losing time, losing opportunities, even paying with its destiny. I once said, if education does not come with responsibility, it is not education. Likewise, if courage is only on the tongue, it is not true courage. What this nation needs are not lofty patriots sitting and reciting verses, but people who know how to stand up, to engage in real life, who know how to plow, how to build. Many boast of their loyalty, claiming to sacrifice for their master. But when asked about their responsibility to the nation, they remain silent. They would rather die for an individual than live for the 100 families. That kind of loyalty only enriches despotism and does nothing to benefit the nation. So-called class and status have produced countless such fake patriots, and as that class of people grows, society will become chaotic. It is frightening when false voices ring loud, while authentic voices are suppressed. The nation needs knowledge, needs action, not more empty shadows. The nation cannot entrust itself to such people, for once deceit takes the throne, truth will be obscured, and the path to civilization will be blocked. What we need are people who dare to abandon false titles, dare to step onto the streets, dare to plunge into reality. Only they are worthy of the two words, independence, amidst a society yearning for change. I realize one thing: knowledge cannot merely reside on paper. It must be voiced aloud, echoing among the crowd to awaken, to connect, to ignite the will in people's hearts. Humans inherently possess thoughts, but if kept forever within, those thoughts are like a fire buried deep in a cave, unable to illuminate anyone. Only when one dares to speak them, dares to express them before others, will that fire spread, connecting into a common strength. Many years ago, I saw the people around me living like shadows. Whatever they thought, they kept to themselves, whispering only to family. But when in public, they remained silent, bowing their heads as if they had no voice. That silence, extended from one generation to the next, plunged the nation into darkness. I want to break that silence. I believe each person must cultivate the habit of speaking their mind. Not just speaking at home, but in assembly halls, in markets, in public spaces. For only a public voice is a true voice, but speaking is not shouting loudly, nor is it spouting empty rhetoric. Speaking is to persuade, to enlighten, to sow hope. The power of a speech lies not in a resonant voice or flowery words, but in sincerity, in the knowledge hidden behind every word. Listeners will be moved when they feel the speaker is genuinely living, genuinely sharing. I once tried standing before a group of villagers, explaining the law to them. At first, they looked at me with suspicion. But when I recounted examples from their own lives' land disputes, abuses of power by officials, they immediately paid attention. They listened, they nodded. And after that session, they began discussing their rights and responsibilities among themselves. That was the moment I understood that public speaking can stir souls that seem to have long been dormant. Some say that public speaking is just rhetoric, bringing no benefit. I disagree. For every society that wishes to progress needs open exchange. If there is only one direction, only commands from above, the people will forever be mute. But if the people know how to speak out, how to debate, they will gradually become the subjects of the nation. Public speaking has another meaning. It cultivates human character. When one dares to stand before a crowd, one learns to organize thoughts, to speak clearly, to take responsibility for one's words. That is the first step for a citizen to become someone with conviction, with a voice in the community. I envision a nation where the populace no longer hesitates, but dares to stand up and express their thoughts. In a village with a dispute, the people do not whisper behind backs but gather together, each voicing their opinion. In a city with a problem, the people do not merely wait for officials, but speak up and discuss it themselves. That is the image of a mature society. I believe that knowledge and freedom truly exist only when people know how to voice their opinions. Books teach us how to think, but only when words are uttered do they transform into social power. Silence is complicity with darkness. Speaking out is lighting the path. And I hope future generations understand that learning is not just to write, to read, but also to speak sincerely, persuasively, so as to stir the hearts of others. When a nation knows how to speak truthfully, to speak openly, that nation holds the key to civilization. As I observe life, a disease appears everywhere: greed. It infiltrates every family, every market alley, every official's office. People can pretend to be dignified, pretend to be upright, but just by looking at how they handle money, their true nature becomes clear. Greed is what corrupts human dignity. A greedy person will no longer know justice, no longer keep promises. Today they might smile, tomorrow they are ready to betray. Trust is eroded solely by greed. And once trust is lost, human relationships turn into cold calculation. I have seen many who, having just gained a little profit, immediately want more. They never stop. Money becomes their master. And humans are mere servants while chasing after material things. They lose self-respect, forget duty, forget even humanity. More dangerously, greed not only destroys individuals but also poisons the entire nation. When a society is riddled with greedy people, from officials to common folk, everyone thinks only of their personal gain. Officials are corrupt, common people resort to tricks, businesses engage in deceit. Social order collapses, trust vanishes. Such a nation, even if its treasury is full, is merely a decaying tree trunk. I remember once an old friend asked me, "What worries you most for the nation?" I didn't answer that it was foreign powers, nor military might. I said, the worst is greed. For foreign powers can only invade the body, but greed will rot the soul. A greedy nation will self-destruct. Greed also clouds reason. The greedy believe they are intelligent when they accumulate much, but in reality, they are foolish because they lose things more important than money: trust, tranquility, sustainability. Short-term gains blind them, while long-term harms they don't bother to see. Some argue that everyone has greed, it's just a matter of degree. I don't deny that human nature always wants more, but the difference lies in knowing when to stop. Greed is not the desire for progress. The desire for progress makes us learn, work, create, while greed only makes us seize, deceive, and trample upon others. The more I think, the more I realize that a nation aspiring to rise must begin by resisting greed. One cannot hope for a rich and powerful nation when its people only know how to hoard for themselves. Wealth must be created through labor and knowledge, not by schemes. Benefits must be shared equitably, and it cannot be that a few seize everything while the majority wallow in misery. I once witnessed a village torn apart by the greed of a powerful individual. He seized land, forced heavy taxes on the people, and amassed wealth for himself. At first, the villagers were silent, thinking that patience would bring peace, but the more silent they were, the more he encroached. Ultimately, the village was depleted, children starved, and the elderly were left without support. The greed of one person became a calamity for the entire community. Conversely, I also saw an honest merchant. He became wealthy through hard work, knowing how to share benefits with those around him. He did not let greed guide him, but used trustworthiness as his capital. Thanks to this, his business not only became sustainable, but also led the entire community to prosper. That is proof that resisting greed is not only moral, but also a wise path. Therefore, I write these lines as a warning. Do not think greed is just a minor sin. It is a disease that rots from within, causing the entire body of society to perish. And the victor is not the one who hoards much wealth, but the one who knows how to restrain, to stop at the right time, to preserve dignity. After speaking of the devastation of greed, I see one thing even more clearly. People can only maintain their dignity if they know how to look inward and examine themselves. Self-reflection is not a leisure activity but a daily duty, like a farmer weeding a rice field or a blacksmith sharpening a blade. If neglected, weeds will overrun, the blade will dull. And so too with the spirit, it will decay from within if not self-examined. I notice some people spend their entire lives fixated on examining others. They dissect the mistakes of those next to them, gloating when someone stumbles. But when looking at themselves, they evade, pretending to be absolutely pure. Such people imagine themselves clever, but in reality, they are blind. For whoever cannot see their own blemishes will never mature. True strength does not come from eloquent declarations, nor from brilliant successes. It comes from honesty with oneself. A person who dares to confront the weaknesses and bad habits within can truly move forward with steadfastness. As for those who only know how to conceal and embellish, sooner or later their masks will be stripped away. I have experienced this myself. At times, I thought I was right, that I was enlightened enough. But when night fell, I would sit down and review my actions. I discovered many shameful things: causeless anger, invisible arrogance, a hard-to-recognize selfishness. If not honest with oneself, these things will grow, dominate every decision, and eventually ruin a person's life. Society is the same. A nation wishing to mature must know how to self-examine. We cannot merely blame foreign powers for all failures. We must dare to look directly at our own shortcomings. Otherwise, we will forever repeat our mistakes. Collective self-reflection will clear away spiritual debris, paving the way for a brighter future. I remember a sage once taught, "A strong person is not one who has never fallen, but one who knows how to rise after falling." That is true for individuals and for an entire nation. Only when one dares to admit error and dares to change does one have the opportunity to ascend to a higher level. Many fear self-examination because they think it's an act of weakness, of demeaning oneself. But in reality, it is precisely self-reflection that reveals true character. Whoever dares to expose themselves, that person is truly resilient. The pretense of perfection only makes people empty, while honesty with oneself gives us depth. I want to add that self-reflection does not stop at self-reproach. It must lead to action. If one only sees flaws but doesn't correct them, self-reflection is useless, just like looking in a mirror, seeing a dusty face, but not washing at the mirror doesn't help at all. To see to know, and to know to change. That is the true meaning. I have seen poor people who maintained their dignity because they knew how to examine themselves. Conversely, there are wealthy and powerful individuals who became decadent because they never asked themselves, what is the purpose of my life? The difference lies in one side ceaselessly purifying their spirit, while the other indulges, allowing desires to lead them. What do we live for? Are we being honest? Are we being selfish? Are we being greedy? If one can answer these questions, one has already traveled half the path to maturity. And if a nation also knows how to ask these things of itself, that nation will never be destroyed. Over many years of observing the world's transformations, I have understood that no nation can stand still when humanity is in motion. We cannot stubbornly cling to outdated norms, yet neither can we blindly chase after everything outsiders bring. The most important thing is to know how to adopt selectively. I have seen many who, upon first contact with the West, immediately began to worship it. They wore foreign clothes, ate foreign food, even scorned their own nation's customs. In their eyes, everything from outside was perfect, while everything domestic was backward. Such foreign adoration is like a disease, turning people into clumsy imitators, losing their spiritual core. Conversely, there are other extremists who, upon hearing of anything foreign, immediately rush to oppose it. They lull themselves into complacency with the belief that merely clinging to tradition is enough to withstand the entire world. But while they are engrossed in preserving outdated norms, the world has advanced hundreds of steps. Such conservatism is no different from imprisoning oneself in a jail of one's own making. Both attitudes are equally dangerous. One loses its identity, the other shackles its future. What we need is the middle path, opening doors to learn, but without losing our independent spirit, adopting what is useful, discarding what is unsuitable, and retaining our core values as a foundation. I remember once standing before a classroom, I asked, if the West has steamships, should we learn from them? The students were silent, some hesitant. I continued, if we don't learn, we will forever row boats by hand while others travel thousands of miles in just a few days. That is not preserving tradition, that is suicide. Then I asked again, but if we learn their ways of dressing, speaking, and living, yet forget our own language, our own etiquette, what will we become? We will become rootless, without the soul of our nation. The lesson here is to be selective. We learn technology, science, law, social organization things that enrich national strength, but we still preserve our independent spirit, still nurture our identity, like a bamboo plant that can bend in the wind but never breaks at its roots. Many believe that selective assimilation is far more difficult than either of the two extremes. Indeed, because it demands alertness, analysis, and the courage to say, this we need, that we do not. But it is precisely that difficulty which defines the right path. I also observe a special point. Those who know how to be selective are often not loud. They quietly learn, quietly apply, and then the results speak for themselves. In contrast, those who blindly adore foreign things or are staunchly conservative are often very noisy, but ultimately only create chaos. What the nation needs are alert individuals who know how to quietly build, rather than those who only know how to shout. A nation that knows how to assimilate selectively will be both strong and stable. It is like a body that knows how to absorb nutrients, but also has resistance to eliminate toxins. A nation that either swallows everything or rejects everything will sooner or later weaken in this era of burgeoning civilization. If we do not know how to learn, we will fall behind, but if we learn blindly, we will lose ourselves. That balance, though difficult, is precisely the key to preserving true independence. After years of observation and reflection, I discern a painful paradox. Many endlessly pursue material independence, yet unwittingly lose spiritual independence. They believe that with much money and many possessions, they will be free. But in reality, they are becoming slaves to money. I have seen the wealthy, with magnificent homes and overflowing treasuries, yet their souls are withered. They live in fear of losing possessions, fear of others competing for them, fear that tomorrow will not be like today. Their freedom is not true freedom, but merely a superficial veneer. For if the spirit is bound by material things, where then is independence? This is true not only for individuals, but also for a nation. A country can quickly become rich through trade, technology, or resources. But if the national spirit remains weak, still swayed by foreign powers, then that wealth is no different from a treasure whose key is held by someone else. Material independence without spiritual independence is ultimately just another form of dependence. Meanwhile, there are people who possess little in terms of assets, yet they maintain their self-respect, preserve their spirit of autonomy. They know what they need, dare to speak the truth, dare to refuse bribery. It is they who are truly independent. I believe that if an entire nation possesses that spirit, no power can subjugate it. At this point, I must emphasize an invisible yet extremely precious asset: trust. Money can be lost, wealth can vanish, but when a person or a nation is trusted, that is an incomparable capital. Trust is the foundation of all relationships. A family exists through the trust between husband and wife, parents and children. A community exists through the trust between neighbors, between buyers and sellers. A nation exists through the trust between the people and the government. If faith is lost, even with strict laws, even with strong military force, society will collapse. I once saw a small merchant who had nothing but his bare hands, but by maintaining his integrity, his business grew day by day. Customers came to him not for cheap prices, but because they trusted he would not deceive them. That integrity, accumulated daily, became a shield stronger than gold and silver. Likewise, a nation that wishes to be respected by the world must preserve its credibility. It cannot promise one thing and do another. It cannot only worry about immediate gains and forget long-term honor. Losing money can be recovered. Losing trust is hard to regain. Therefore, I always consider trust the highest crystallization of education, morality, and independent spirit. For only those with knowledge understand the value of integrity. Only those with morality dare to uphold integrity, and only independent individuals will not sell integrity cheaply. If I could impart one final message, it would be this: learn to nurture an independent spirit. Live to preserve trust. Use knowledge to build mutual faith. Only then can the nation join the ranks of civilization, not just wealthy, but also respected. I do not recount these things to embellish, but to remind that our nation's only path is the path of education, spiritual independence, and trust. Without them, everything else is merely an illusion. With them, even in poverty, we can rebuild everything. The journey just completed has been like a long conversation between you and me, where each idea is not just to be read, but to reflect upon one's own life. Education is not a coat to be displayed, but the breath, the eyes, the backbone that helps us stand tall. Without it, people easily bow their heads, accepting to be led. With it, we have enough courage to walk, enough alertness not to be deceived. But the biggest question remains for you, the listener, in today's life. When money, status, and conveniences easily satisfy us, how much of an independent spirit do you still retain? Do you learn to boast or to build a firm standing within the community? And most importantly, do you dare to turn knowledge into action, or will you let it slumber in the pages of books? From this book, I draw a simple yet not easily accomplished conclusion. If a nation is to be strong, first each individual must be strong. Strong here does not mean muscular or wealthy, but strong in intellect, in character, in the courage not to bow before injustice. Learning to live usefully, not to be led by greed, to know self-reflection, to uphold trust. These are the bricks that build the future. I believe that if everyone persistently lights the lamp of education within themselves, this nation will no longer be a land of fragmented individuals, but will become a community with soul and spirit. And now that the story concludes, I want to send you off with a greeting. Take that question forward. Find your own answer through your own life.